I'm really glad you're here hanging out with me to talk about something that the world of marriage research is so vast. There's so much to go into. And attachment is one of those things that I just haven't spent a lot of time learning about. And having somebody who is brilliant like you to come in and talk to me about this is really exciting to me. So I want to, first, do you want to just kind of tell people who you are? That might be a good place to start.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Kyle Benson. I am what I consider an intentionally intimate relationship coach. I mostly work with couples on conflict, intimacy, and sex. I also work in Dr. Gottman's Love Lab. I manage the Love Lab in terms of kind of some of the research studies and the supplies for couples who come into the Love Lab and work under the research director there. So I'm a huge research nerd, and attachment is one of the things I research a lot. I mean, I have a huge textbook full of research studies. And so this is one of my big passions, is talking about attachment and why it's so important to our intimate relationships.
Awesome. Yeah. So why is attachment so important to our relationships? First of all, I guess, what is attachment? And then we can get into the why.
Yeah. So attachment, there's attachment theory, and essentially attachment theory is how we were raised as children, how we were loved, how we were cherished by our parents or taught kind of who we were. We internalize those experiences, and those lead to very different experiences for different family cultures. And so if you have parents who are pretty available, who let you have freedom of choices, they respect your autonomy, they invite closeness, and they're kind of set healthy boundaries, you tend to have this internalized belief that you're worthy of love, you're worthy of belonging. You can be much more direct about your needs. Your feelings and needs are appreciated in your family. So when you have an adult relationship, right, you're like, hey, like, this bothers me. Can we talk about it?
Ooh.
Right?
Yeah.
If we go to more insecure family dynamics, right, you grow up with a parent who is sometimes available, but sometimes not. And you don't really know, you can't really tell why, right? You don't know, there's not a clear, like, okay, it's stress, or right, the parent isn't communicating that to you. You start to develop this sense that, well, maybe I'm doing something wrong. And sometimes your parent gets really critical of you, right? Why didn't you do this? What's wrong with you? And you get these subtle hints that something about you is kind of contributing to the negativity in your child-parent interaction. Bring that into your adult relationship, you start to develop this belief that you're not enough, or that you're too much, right? And so one of the ways you adapt is you really kind of cling to other people and actually lose yourself in the relationship. And so there's a whole bunch of things. You really love intimacy, you love closeness, but so much that it's almost too intense.
It's almost like suffocating.
Yeah, and because it's driven more by fear, not by, this is actually what I want. It's almost like this is never going to last. And with some couples I work with, they talk about like the scarcity cycle. Okay, I don't believe it's going to last. I believe I only have a little amounts of connection I can get, and after that, it's gone, right? And that is rooted in kind of that individual's childhood upbringing as well.
It's the little kid who hugs the kitty so tight that she suffocates it.
Yeah, and I mean just like I love you, I love you, I love you, but at the same time, it's like there's no breathing room. And what happens is in these relationships, when it comes to difficult issues or conflict, anxious individuals don't bring up their needs or feelings because they have the belief they're not worthy of it, or they don't deserve it. And then they act in sometimes indirect or passive aggressive ways. And so that also perpetuates them from getting their needs met.
What's a good example of that? Of somebody who, I mean, I can think of examples from my own life. I feel like I'm a little bit more of the anxious side of attachment. But as far as like being passive aggressive or that kind of behavior, what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, from attachment research, we would call it a secondary strategy because it's indirect, right? There's direct strategies where it's like, hey, like I'm really needing us to spend time together because I miss you, right? I feel like we've been distant lately. Very direct, very clear about what the issue is and what you want. More passive aggressive strategy is you're always working on the car. Okay. Like now you're just attacking me for the car. It's not about the relationship. It's not about you. It's about the car and your partner.
It's like an insinuation. It's a clue, but there's no direct request. There's no ownership of your feelings and your experience and your desires. It's more of a passive aggressive whap upside the head. You're doing something wrong and I need something from you. I'm not going to tell you what either of those things are. I'm just going to wait for you to figure it out.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah. And so we will see that a lot. Another thing that we'll see with anxious partners, and I've been guilty of this myself, is we get very emotional and act almost helpless. And like we become so emotionally dysregulated or overwhelmed, and we'll act like the world's ending, like this is the worst thing ever. You're the worst partner ever. You never care about me. You never make an investment, da, 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 da. Yeah. And this is a strategy, right? If we create a lot of attention, right? Sometimes our parents would respond and it would help. And we learned, okay, if I act helpless, if I act extra needy, if I act this way, I might get a response. And so it's this learned strategy. It's kind of like a learned helplessness a little bit. But in adult relationships, the more you use that, you also get a partner who gets very overwhelmed, doesn't share their needs, doesn't share their feelings. And we have a whole bunch of negative cycles that happen with that.
Ugh. I call that pattern horribilizing. It's just like putting a magnifying glass on all the terrible things and just letting yourself escalate. And then obviously if your partner's not grounded, they could escalate too.
Yeah.
That's a icky feeling to be stuck in a cycle like that.
It is. And I think Stan Tacken, he does the psychobiological approach to couples therapy, PACT. He talks about anxious individuals as being allergic to hope. Because it's like, I'm so fearful that this isn't going to last. I'm so fearful that I can't depend on you, that you're not going to be available. Again, we go back to the childhood. Mom was inconsistent. Dad was inconsistent. Dad was distant, whatever those experiences were. I am not worthy of someone being consistent and reliable with me. And so then move forward into these adult relationships. And this is also what happens in dating. They get someone who's secure and wants to connect with them, and they actually push them away because they're like, this doesn't match my internal experience. This doesn't feel familiar to me. This feels unsafe, right?
It's too good to be true almost.
Right. And again, goes back to kind of the conditioning. And so that's what attachment theory in terms of the anxious really kind of uncovers. In terms of the avoidance, it's the opposite strategy of distancing. Right. And so instead of getting close to you, I'm going to maintain my independence. I'm going to maintain my autonomy above everything else.
Okay. So this is the other side of the coin that we're talking about now.
Yeah.
Okay, and so if you're not typically anxious, you end up being avoidant.
You can be, right. And so there's without getting too nerdy about it, there's a spectrum between anxious and avoidance. Yeah. People who are secure tend to be like a five or so in the middle. Right. The more you lean towards either end of the spectrum, you tend to show particular patterns or ways of interacting, in particular beliefs about yourself, beliefs about other people.
Got it. So we talked about the anxious side. Now we're talking about the avoidance side.
Exactly. And so the avoidant, right, they come from a family culture that their needs were not really acknowledged. They were more neglected. There's also on the other extreme, when we get more abusive family, we get a little more disorganized attachment, which is a mix of anxious avoidant and kind of complete instability. But for avoidance, there's just not a lot of emotional connection. There's not a lot of meeting of needs. You're kind of just spent a lot of time alone. And that's how you learn to get through your childhood. And so take this belief that I have to be independent. I can only rely on myself. You get into an adult relationship or you get married to someone, that belief's going to come up. And so it's, in terms of intimacy, we see a lot less disclosure of personal feelings, of needs. Even avoidant partners who I work with, they're like, I don't know what my needs are, right? But then they get in these nasty conflict cycles where they too get passive aggressive because they're like, I'm mad about this, but I don't know exactly why I'm mad about it. And that's because one of the strategies of avoidance is they avoid their own needs and feelings.
Oof.
And that's how they learn to cope, right? If I don't pay attention to these and I pretend that I can deal with this all by myself, then I will survive. But when you get into a relationship with a partner who has needs and feelings and tries to bring that in, they also dismiss those feelings and needs, which leads to this whole pursue withdrawal cycle that we get in that is pretty common in couples. And so it just creates a lot of issues with that.
Talk a little bit more about the pursue withdraw cycle, because my assumption is that it's not uncommon for somebody who's on the anxious side of the spectrum and somebody who's on the avoidant side of the spectrum to kind of end up together fairly regularly, and then you get this kind of like chase. What does that look like in your experience?
Yeah, and I mean, what we know from research is, 92% of couples struggle with this closeness distance issue. And again, if we think about the spectrum, people who are within the more secure stuff are able to navigate it a lot better. Okay, what do you need to be independent, but also be close to me? What do you need to be close to me? How can we talk about this without the insecurities hijacking the conflict? When we talk about the pursue withdrawal cycle, what happens is the attachment fears. You're not available. You don't care about me. I'm never enough for you, blah, 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 right? Come into those conflicts and it escalates them. And so you get one partner who their way of trying to get connection is to kind of amplify things, right? Act more distressed, act more helpless, act like the world's on fire, right? Create more of a scene. And then you have the other partner who minimizes, dismisses, and does the opposite. So as one partner goes up, the other partner goes down, and around and around and around we go. Unfortunately, because the insecurities are involved, it keeps us kind of stuck in this position. And to actually move forward, right? And this comes from EFT research, emotionally focused couples therapy, which is rooted in attachment, and even Gottman, right? Softening the startup for the pursuer helps the kind of distancer re-engage a little bit more too. And we need both of those to kind of level the playing fields and change that interaction. Go ahead.
I'm just thinking about how awareness is such a huge thing here. I use this quote a lot. It's from Carl Jung, but he says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And I know that there's going to be people who listen to this and they've been unconscious. They haven't been conscious of the fact that they are maybe more anxious or more avoidant. They didn't have words to put to the dynamic that they have going on in their relationship. And I think just listening to your words over the last couple of minutes are going to have some people, like light bulbs are going to be turning on and they're going to go, oh my gosh, this is the pattern that we have. And now like I can identify myself as the more anxious person or the more avoidant person. And now I know what I can do to shift that dynamic, which is really exciting. You know, on the anxious side, it sounds like a huge part of it is just learning to calm yourself down, like learning to soothe those big anxious emotions that come along and that need to like escalate for attention, and the realization that if you de-escalate, maybe actually you'll get more of what you want from your partner than what your natural inclination is.
Right. And that's the hope, right? And that's what we see too, right? When we're able to calm down, when we're able to be more grounded and say, here's what I need, and here's how you can help me meet that need, it gives your partner a recipe to be more successful with you. One of the things we see with anxious partners, the more they escalate, the more indirect they get, the more blaming they get, the more critical they get. And instead of it being like, I need more closeness or I need more connection, it's like, you're never available, you don't ever care about me. You don't invest in our relationship, right? But but all the partner hears is you're never enough. You always fail me. And for the avoidant partner, when they hear that message, okay, I'm getting attacked. I'm going to withdraw, right?
Put up the shield, build a wall,
right? And what's heartbreaking is often when I work with these avoidant partners, they will say, I feel like I can never do it right. So the best thing for me to do is to step away. Is for me to walk away, is for me to leave, right? And so what's happening is that the anxious partner is trying to get connection, but the approach that they're doing is actually pushing their partner farther away. And unfortunately, the farther the partner goes, the more the avoidant avoids, the more the anxious goes up, right? And so this is where it's a cycle. It is a pattern they co-create together.
I just have this mental image of a person drawing a sword and chasing after their partner going, come here, I just want to be close to you. And it's like, oh, no, stay away. So it's like, put the sword away and calm down a little bit, and maybe your partner will come to you. So something that you talked a little bit about the primary and secondary strategies for an anxious partner. What are some of the primary and secondary strategies for an avoidant partner?
So primary strategies are secure strategies, right?
Yeah.
Secondary strategies are the anxious avoidant, right? And so we talked a little bit about more the anxious.
Good distinction.
Right. The avoidant strategies are deny, dismiss, and distance. Right. And so all of it is, in a way, it's like, if I pretend this isn't here, then we'll be okay. Right. And one of the things in the research it talks about is this defensive self-enhancement that we see in avoidant partners, is they will enhance their self-image to make themselves feel good about themselves. But they don't really know their needs or their feelings. And they actually struggle to be really connected with what's going on for them or their experience. And they don't have a realistic view of themselves. And so it's interesting. I've had people reach out who've been like, my avoidant partner took the attachment quiz and they came up secure. And I'm like, of course they did. In their mind, they think they're secure. They believe this, right? And they think that. But when it comes to the interactions, we can tell in the behavior there's something different, right? And again, we go back to that awareness, right? If they have the awareness, well, I withdraw, I get flooded, I get overwhelmed, I can't handle conflict, right? That becomes when a client has that, that's a lot easier for me to work with than it is someone who says, no, I don't have anything to do with it. There's nothing that I contribute to this. It's all her, right? So that's something that's really important to mention too. But the avoidant strategies are deny, dismiss, and distance, right? Protect your autonomy. The other thing that we see is they present not committed to the relationship, right? They choose hobbies over other things. And again, the more avoidant, the more we see this, the more in the extreme. There are avoidant partners who are married and been married for 20, 30 years, even 40 years. I'm working with some of those partners right now. They've never cheated. So again, the farther we go, the more we get lower commitment, the more we get disengagement and conflict, avoiding conflict, trying to deny their own feelings and denying their partner's feelings. And so we kind of get that cycle again.
That sounds like more on the kind of the medium side of the spectrum, is that they have these behaviors. What about the extremes? Like how does either the anxious attachment or avoidant show up on the extreme sides?
Yeah, I mean, on the extreme side, you get someone who, for avoidance, someone who will live in the woods and will not rely on anyone, right? And to me, insecure attachment strategies are trauma-based, right? It's this. I mean, we see it changes how you see yourself and how you see other people. And so people who cannot depend or rely on other people grew up with people who were not dependable or reliable. And so that is tough for them to change that belief and get experiences of that. But that's what in therapy or coaching, right? We try to create experiences that challenge those beliefs and see that their partner is more available and responsive and more engaged. But on the extreme, it is not engaging. It's not sharing feelings. It's not disclosing anything intimate, anything that would build connection or intimacy. It's almost like this big brick wall that's like, I'm not letting you into my heart.
I did an interview like a week and a half ago with this woman, Wendy. I can't remember her last name off the top of my head, but it was about narcissism. And this sounds to me a lot like what she was describing in narcissistic behavior, is when somebody they have a really hard time connecting with other people. They have a really hard time relying on other people, and they're really good at kind of validating their own perspective and their own experience while invalidating somebody else's.
Defensive self-enhancement.
Yep. That one.
And so that's what we see. I mean, it's really interesting. I think if you see avoidance, you're going to see more overt narcissism. And so they're very more, I'm independent, I'm all this other thing. And for me, narcissism is a trauma-based reaction because the self of the person is super, super fragile, that they have these strategies to make themselves feel better at the cost of other people, right? And so there's a whole bunch of stuff there. What's super interesting is we have covert narcissism, which would lead more on the anxious side too, which is I'm going to care for everyone else, but then this kind of attacking other people and a whole bunch of other things. And so that is more subtle stuff. But also on the farther extreme, we get into borderline personality disorder.
Is this on the anxious side?
On the anxious side, yeah. And so because it's like, I will die if I can't be connected to you, right? I'm going to harm myself if you're not going to get close to me. And we will see people who will threaten suicide to try to get, as a strategy to get someone to love them. And they're inside, I mean, again, so much trauma to develop those internal beliefs that lead to those disorders. There's just this feeling of, I'm not lovable. No one can be there for me. And they oscillate on this roller coaster inside that's just really difficult for them. And then they have these strategies that maintain that kind of belief system. And that's what we see with both the anxious styles and the avoidance, right? Their self-views, what they've internalized, get perpetuated in their actions and interactions with other people.
Good grief.
Yeah.
That's a tough cycle to be stuck in. Like a tough, I can see why so many couples deal with this and end up in your office or on your computer screen, I'm sure. So I know there's probably a lot of people listening right now and they might be feeling a little despair. Yeah. Like, holy crap, I see this in my relationship and it can be a little bit scary. It's similar. I got an email from somebody the other day. I recommended they read the 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. And she messaged me. She's like, I'm through the first 3 chapters and I am freaking out because all these problems describe my relationship. And she started to panic and she's like, what do I do? What do I do? Does that mean we're going to get divorced? Does that mean we're stuck? And like, I want to encourage people, one, that like knowing about a problem and realizing you have it does not necessarily dictate your fate. But I want to kick this over to you. If you do have if you have attachment styles that are outside of that kind of healthy middle ground that you're noticing that are perpetuating behaviors and cycles in your relationship that are damaging, that aren't helping you get where you want to go, is there a way to like change your behavior style, or are you kind of just stuck being anxious or avoidant the rest of your life?
So yeah, I'll share my opinion, but I'll share the research a little bit too. So the research shows that we might not change our fundamental style, but we'll change our strategies, right? We'll move from the secondary to primary. So there's a little hint to that in terms of couples therapy, but there's also another thing where they call earn secure attachment. Right. This is what probably you've developed and what I've developed doing all the hard work we've done to be better partners and be better individuals, is we develop new strategies and new beliefs about ourselves that present more secure, even though we grew up more insecure. And Stan Tacken, he talks about you can be insecure and have a secure functioning relationship. Emotionally focused couples therapy, same thing, right? How you engage with the difficult things can change. Same with Gottman method, right? If you can, right? They talk about it in a mismatch of emotional engagement, right? One partner dismisses, and then it creates this cycle where we get stuck in that. When we teach them speaker listener skills, they're able to build a bridge to each other. We start to move forward. So yeah, I think, right, as long as both partners are willing to do the work, I've seen some great success with it. I also have people who are at a stage where they show up, they don't put in the work, they don't want to work on it. And it's really tough to change a relationship when one partner is already emotionally divorced the other. And that's just the honest truth. And the reality is, what we know from the research is, for couples therapy, we know about 70% of couples get success, and 20% stay the same, and 10% actually find therapy harmful in a way. So, how
do they define success in a study like that?
Well,
or do they feel like they're doing better?
Yeah, so they use what are called self-report questionnaires, and there's a bunch of, without getting too nerdy, they use like a questionnaire that they then examine where people are at, and they create kind of a grading scale. And if you fall within a certain part of that grading scale, you're considered distressed. If you fall above a grading scale, you're considered not distressed, right? And so those are ways we benchmark the success of treatment. And so you'll do that. Like, we're doing a research study on Gottman method couples therapy right now. And we had couples take assessments at the start of therapy, at the completion of therapy, and then at a 6-month follow-up, right? And we're going, how effective was this treatment right across this international study we're doing? Yeah. And so that's really how we can tell if it's effective. And so we're kind of relying on people to be honest on those. And for the most part, people are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, a few minutes ago, this word a couple of times, and I hear it all the time. And I'm wondering if you can elaborate just a little bit. You talk about how a lot of the success of therapy, whether you're doing emotion-focused therapy or Gottman therapy or attachment therapy or whatever couples therapy you're doing, it hinges on you being willing to do the work. Mm-hmm. What does that mean, to do the work? Like, if you're specifically with regards to this conversation, you see that you have an attachment style or an attachment, like a cycle of behavior that's based off of your attachment styles that's unhealthy, that's causing problems in your relationship. What does it mean to do the work?
I think the first part is getting some awareness and just realizing it and looking at this stuff honestly, right? I think that's where it gets really tough. I get a lot of emails be like, I want to do couples therapy, my partner won't. They don't see them being a part of the problem. Again, that's a very avoidant. I don't bring anything to this. It's all your fault. Right. And typically anxious partners are the ones who instigate starting therapy, unless the anxious partner gets what we call pursuer burnout. Then we sometimes get a flip where the avoidant partner starts to pursue the anxious partner who has shut down. And that does happen too.
So step one is just being willing to walk in the office and just be like, okay, we've obviously got a cycle here that's not working for us. Let's have a conversation about it.
Yeah. And I think reading blogs, the stuff you post on your podcast is going to be helpful. My articles, going to the Gottman website. There's a lot of helpful stuff out there, that people can start to educate themselves. And you can do some, depending on how insecure your relationship is, you can make some changes independent of therapy or coaching. But if the insecurity is really hijacking your interactions in terms of intimacy, conflict, and emotional connection, you're going to need probably another person there to kind of be a witness and to say, hey, I'm noticing this, what's going on? And the other thing that I would recommend, because I hear this a lot, is if you have one therapist who you feel like isn't a good fit, right? Go find a therapist who has specific training in couples therapy, because they have education and experiences designed to really support you in that. And I would recommend, if you can, look for certified therapists, either in emotionally focused therapy, Gottman method, or PACT, as those are kind of other approaches I really believe in. And the other thing is, if you notice judgment or things in those therapy, tell your therapist. We're not perfect.
What do you mean? If you notice judgment coming from the therapist?
Mm-hmm. If you're noticing that, or you're feeling unheard, I would encourage you to say something. And that's going to be telling how that person responds. If they continue to be judgmental, right? Okay, that's probably someone you don't want to work with. If they are compassionate or empathize with you, okay, we made a repair. And that can actually help you realize, wow, I can say something and I can repair this. Maybe I can try that with my partner.
Yeah.
Right. Because therapy, coaching is still kind of a relationship. Right. And I've definitely said things and I'm like, that didn't sound great. And then we have to do a little repair work, but it actually makes our work a lot stronger too.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What about people who are like, yeah, therapy is just like, maybe it's out of our price range, or I could never get my partner to join me in therapy, or therapy is just not my thing. What does the work look like then?
Yeah. And so I think, you do a lot of this stuff too, where you help one partner change the dynamics in the relationship. And so I know with your Epic Wives experiment, I've had people who are part of my email list in my community who have joined your Epic Wives experiment and had great success with it. Right. And so what can happen is when you start to change the behaviors you do and you start to change how you interact, it can also lead to a change of your partner. And I'd actually maybe like to actually push it back to you of like, what are the things you've seen, even with the Epic Wives experiment around, hey, when you one partner change, here's the change we see secondary.
Yeah, I think thanks for throwing it back at me. I think so many of the problems that we create in our relationship are created. Like they're not one of my favorite quotes, and I don't even know if this guy knows how brilliant it was, but I was interviewing a Super Bowl champion. His name is Satema. And he said, the marriage you have is the marriage you've chosen for yourself. And if you want something different, you need to make different choices. And I think a lot of people find themselves in a relationship where they're like, I feel like a constant failure. I feel like I can't do anything right. Or on the flip side, like I feel like no matter what I do, my partner won't connect with me. You know, I'm making all these efforts and it feels like they're just pulling away and my feelings don't matter. And there's this despair that sets in that I'm not lovable. I'm not good enough for either one of them. And they get upset and they blame their partner. I think that's the natural inclination is if my partner was different, our marriage would be better. But what we don't realize is that the choices that we have made have gotten us the choices we've made as individuals and as a couple has brought us exactly to this point that we're in today. And what I love doing is helping people realize that they have the power to make different choices, even though those choices feel uncomfortable. It's amazing how many choices we actually have at our disposal that we don't allow ourselves to believe we have, because it's much easier to just say like, no, I'm just stuck. But I think once you kind of take a step into that and realize I have the power to choose a lot of different things, like I have the power to choose what you said earlier, how I bring up this topic. Maybe I'm the more anxious person. I'm the one who typically brings up the problems in the relationship. And the way that I do it is using that secondary tactic of like, you've spent so much time at work lately. What's going on? I'm so frustrated. Instead of saying, hey, I really love you and I miss you and I want to spend more time together. Just that one little shift in how you communicate your stress and anxiety can cut the cycle off where it typically begins. And all of a sudden you see a completely new dynamic emerge inside your relationship. So I'm a huge, huge believer that one person can make small changes that have a massive impact in the overall relationship just by your willingness to take some responsibility and shift the dynamic a little bit in the cycle a little bit.
Yeah, and I would 100% agree with that. I mean, one of the quotes that I really live by is that every relationship problem is actually two problems. It's the problem and it's how you go about it.
Yeah.
Right. And for the most part, secure couples have almost the same problems as insecure couples. The reason they stay secure is how they engage it. Right. And that's what we're talking about. If you can soften and be more vulnerable and direct, it's going to increase the chances of your partner being more responsive, right? If you can hear your partner's feelings and try to empathize with them and tolerate the discomfort and helplessness that comes up, oh my God, my partner's distressed or having difficulty. How do I sit in this, right? Oh, wow, your partner finally felt heard for the first time in 15 years. That's something.
That's crazy.
Right? Yeah. And so, I mean, there is a lot of power in the choices we make, right? And I wish I had quicker access to this, but I actually have a chart I share with my couples that shows what I call choice points in every conversation, right? And so we start out at like a point here, right? And then based on what one partner does, we either move positive direction or we move negative direction, right? If we move negative direction, right, then we have another choice point. Do we go positive or do we continue negative? Right? Or if it goes positive, does the partner respond defensively? Then do we make a repair? And like the goal is throughout the trajectory of the conversation is we're moving more in the positive direction, right? And there's these tiny choice points that happen constantly in every conversation. The word choices, how we respond, and how we engage. And when I work with couples, it's slowing things down, really listening to each other, really engaging, getting to what John Gottman would say is, understanding precedes problem solving, right? And you know that too. And it makes a huge thing because when we feel understood, when we feel like connected with emotionally, it's a heck of a lot easier for us to be like, okay, well, what do you need? Well, I need this. How do we make this work?
Yeah, the gloves come down.
Yeah.
When your experience is validated and you feel understood, you don't feel like you need to like scream your opinion in somebody's face. That's so much of what arguments is just understand me. Like, I just want you to hear that and tell me I'm not crazy for seeing things this way. Your comments reminded me of, so I just barely started reading this book, Intimacy and Desire by David Schnarch. I don't know if you've read it, but I'm literally just in like getting out of the intro. But last night when I was reading it, I underlined these three kind of bullet points that he says is the key to any couple making progress. The first is the first person you always confront is yourself. The second is you don't mess with the truth, even when it's personally disadvantageous. And the third is how you're feeling isn't the most important thing. It's living up to your responsibilities. And I love his focus on personal responsibility. Like, to me, that is essentially the work that we're talking about. Is if you're more anxious or more avoidant, or you're having any other issue in your relationship or something that's causing issues in your relationship, what it boils down to is, one, can I look at myself first? Two, can I face the truth, even if the truth makes me look bad? And whatever the third one was, which was, I think you're responsible for the things that you're responsible for. Like, you have to take personal responsibility for creating that shift. And if you can follow those steps initially throughout, as you're trying to sort out your marriage, instead of blaming, shaming, pointing the finger at your partner, and looking, I don't know, making them responsible for all of your choices or thoughts or feelings or moods or whatever, a major shift happens. So
yeah, and this is the part too, right? I mean, Schnarch doesn't really agree with attachment theory, but his approach is that you have to be an adult in your relationship for your adult to have true intimacy, right? You have to be responsible for your orgasms. You have to be responsible for your feelings. You have to own your needs and be direct with your partner. And then they get the freedom to choose how to engage in response. Totally. Right. And so, speaking of that, like, I think confronting yourself, what are the patterns that you're contributing to? Are you escalating? Are you attacking your partner? And sometimes it's subtle, right? In a lot of couples, so we talk about how sneaky it is, where a partner might be like, yeah, I typed up a text, but then I deleted it. Wow. Sounds like you really wanted to connect, but then you decided it wasn't worth it. Right. And like, can you confront yourself on realizing how you're withdrawing? Are you willing to look at that you also play a part in this pattern? Right.
We got a question coming in from Jeremy Schultz, and he says, how does the person being adopted fit into this, specifically reactive attachment disorder and adoption? How would that fit into what we're talking about right now? Do you have any, obviously context would be great, but like, any initial thoughts?
Yeah. So RAD, which is reactive attachment disorder, is not RAD. It is a way in which it is an extreme version of attachment, where we don't connect. We have a difficulty connecting with people, and we will connect sometimes with anyone. And so there's no, like, in attachment, we tend to select individuals to build a secure bond with, or try to build an attachment with. With RAD, because of the trauma, because of not having someone there, because of that unavailability, we kind of will sometimes either attach with anyone. And then there's another one, that's another form of attachment. I think it's not deactivated. I can't remember, but it's another disorder where they don't attach with anyone. And so what'll happen with someone who has RAD is they might get adopted by a family, but then they'll go and have a similar connection with someone at the grocery store. But those can be pretty extreme cases. In terms of adoption, right? I think what Jeremy's maybe asking is, if the adoption, depending on the stage of when it happens, right? Those caregivers, what is your quality of attachment with them? Right. I mean, there's kids who go through abusive parents, and then they get put into foster system, and then they get adopted, right? Or they stay through the foster system. Foster system can make it really tough to build attachment relationships with a caregiver. If you get adopted and have a healthy family culture, that can change that too. But yeah, I mean, it really is who were you loved by?
Yeah.
That is what shapes your attachment.
And how were you loved by them?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's huge. So I want to get into tactics so badly, but I just feel like we don't have the bandwidth. But we've talked earlier about doing like maybe a little workshop for people who are more anxious and then one for people who are more avoidant, so that they can learn specific strategies and tools that they can implement to actually move themselves towards that earned attachment. We've got a handful of people watching live. So whether you're watching live or whether you're listening to this on the podcast or watching a recording on YouTube, I'll toss up a link when we kind of have a little bit more clarity around where and when that's going to happen. But I'd love for you to just like leave in the comments if you're interested in doing a workshop like that, if you think it would be helpful. And that'll help us gauge the amount of urgency to put behind it. Go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah, and I think just let us know, like, what are the kind of the core issues you're wrestling with, right? As an anxious partner or an avoidant partner, right? I mean, for the most part, we could probably predict those and tell us, and tell you and inform you on that. But if we're going to create this workshop, we want it to be beneficial for you. So please share that.
Whether you shoot us an email or just a comment on a blog post or the YouTube stream here, we'd love to hear a little bit more about what you're dealing with and what we could do to support you. In the meantime, Kyle, I guess first, is there anything else you want to share about attachment that we didn't cover that would help people kind of have a little bit more understanding here? I'm sure you could talk about this for days. But.
Yeah, we could do a month on this. I think just around this is like, this is deeply rooted stuff, right? I mean, attachment, it comes down to your core beliefs about yourself and some of the stuff, and it can feel daunting and hopeless to try to tackle. And that is part of the attachment strategy, is this: if I break out of what's familiar to me, that's going to be too risky. And it's very common when I'm working with couples for me to ask a partner to say something to the other partner, and they will go, that's risky. That's vulnerable. I don't know if I can do that. That's really hard for me. Right. And so, right, we think about change as this thing that we all are propelled to want to do. But change is really difficult. It asks you to invite hope. It asks you to invite something new. It asks you to step into yourself a little bit more, to step more into your marriage, to really kind of take ownership of that. It just as kind of Snarch was saying. But I think for the most part, right, there is a lot of hope that you can change these things and make a big impact.
I love that. So if anybody wants to learn more about Kyle, where would they go?
Just go to kylebenson.net. Yeah. Just like, I mean, I know with Growth Marriage, I mean, we have plenty of articles and content.
You have so much good stuff on that site, man. Kyle is brilliant. He's one of the people that I look up to and admire most in this space. And you're just going to see him continue to shine, and his ascension to, I don't know, notoriety is going to be pretty fun to watch. So yeah, if you guys want to learn more about Kyle, definitely go check out his website, sign up for his email list. He's a really, really great resource, and one that I look to a lot.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's very kind of you.
Very welcome. Awesome. Okay. Well, we'll log off for now and then hopefully come back and do a workshop in the near future. Thanks everybody for tuning in.
Thank you.
Hey, did you enjoy learning about different attachment styles with Kyle today? Now that you know that you're more of an anxious or an avoidant person, are you curious what the heck you're supposed to do with that information? If so, you are in luck. Kyle is teaching 2 live workshops in the Epic Marriage Club this month. One is for people who are more anxious or people who have anxious partners, and the other one is for people who are more avoidant or who have avoidant partners. Our goal is to give you a game plan of how to move away from the extremes and more towards the center, where you can experience more secure attachments together. So if you want to catch these trainings live, make sure that you sign up for the Epic Marriage Club right now at epicmarriageclub.com. And if you're watching this after the live workshops have already aired, don't worry about it. You're not missing out. You can come watch the recordings. They're always available to members of the Epic Marriage Club. The cost to join is literally less than a movie ticket. And if you know anything about me, I love to over-deliver. So I hope you come join us. It's going to be an amazing experience. Once again, you can sign up at epicmarriageclub.com.